Helen Deutsch, professor of English, UCLA. I am a scholar of 18th century British literature, and I work on very canonical white male authors. But when I started, I was obsessed with Alexander Pope, who was the most important poet of the 18th century, and he was also the most visually portrayed celebrity of the first part of the 18th century, more than kings, more than actors and actresses who were equally important at that time. He was especially famous for translating the Iliad, which earned him his living for the rest of his life, and then he was the most vicious and delightfully hate-filled satirist of the period. I read Samuel Johnson's, who was a really important literary critic who wrote The Lives of the Poets, description of Pope's body. And he talked about how Pope was a hunchback and how he was so weak that he had to wear a corset in order to stand up straight. He had to wear 6 pairs of stockings in order for his legs to have any thickness at all, and how he was chronically ill and disabled. And I was like, why did I not know about this? Why does nobody talk about this? And so my book ended up arguing that Pope, who's obsessed with the heroic couplet and who mastered that form, which is a rhyming iambic pentameter couplet, that deformity and form are the ultimate couplet for him, that he used his physical deformity creatively, one, to trademark his work so that even though it was for sale, it was still his, and also to be an original, even though everything he wrote was pretty much an imitation of the classics. You can't think of a single canonical 18th century author who didn't have some major disability. Was a kind of paradigm for individuality and a way of thinking about disability as not pathology but genius, right? That there's a very different way of valuing difference when we think about how all these canonical figures were embodied in some aberrant, unusual way. And so that's how I got into the field. And these questions about what can disability mean when we think about it, starting with the early modern period, starting with the 18th century, before disability exists as a political identity, while it's still being parsed as a category, while the idea of the normal is still very much under construction, and under construction in relation to race as well, in relation to gender, all these different ways that difference is being solidified. The 18th century and earlier periods, that's not the case. So it's a very, very productive area for disability scholars to be working in, and that's what I've been doing ever since. The humanities has been really important in doing critical disability studies, but they can never do it alone. So we're always connecting with people in history, people in law, people in architecture, people in, of course, medical history, history of science, people who do medicine. All those kinds of connections are essential. I certainly have had a much more expansive sense of how my work could matter because I'm in the field of disability studies. It forced me to reconsider why my work mattered in a way that was probably the best thing that could have ever happened to my work.